What's the strangest coincidence you've ever personally experienced? Part 2. Story 18. Back in the early to mid-90s, the phone system changed and you no longer needed to dial the area code for a long-distance in-state call. We're a small state with only one area code. One morning, I woke up to the phone ringing, and when I picked up, I recognized the voice on the other end as belonging to my old boss from a few years ago. She had an unmistakable voice. We had a nice conversation for a bit before she realized she had dialed the wrong number. I lived in a different town in a different part of the state, but the number must have been off by only one digit from the one she'd tried to call. And to add to the coincidence, I'd overslept and would have been late for work if she hadn't called me and woken me up. Story 19. My sister Emily was on a ski lift in New Mexico when some younger girl across from her asked if her name was Emily. Apparently, the stranger, who kind of looked similar but underage, had found her lost ID the year prior and had been using it for a year to buy alcohol. Edit. After this blew up, I texted my sister, who reminded me it was weirder. She was later hiking with friends for 17 hours, they got tired, thumbed for a hitchhike, and got picked up by this girl's twin. Nope. Too big of a coincidence. Do they really just happen to look like your sister, or are they time-traveling versions of your sister trying to take over your sister's current life? Time travelers from the past that your sister doesn't, wait. Story 20. I met a Canadian guy while on holiday in South America, and we ended up going sightseeing together. At the end of the day, a person behind us tapped him on the shoulder and asked if the scar behind his ear was from cancer surgery. They got talking. Turns out they were from the same small town in Canada, had the same type of brain cancer, and had been operated on by the same surgeon. Story 21. My wife and I were in Tucson visiting my mother, who just moved there. My wife decided she wanted tamales. We drove around for 2 hours, stopping in restaurants looking for tamales. Couldn't find one. Went back to my mother's apartment. Literally 2 minutes later, somebody knocked on the door of my mother's apartment, asking us if anyone wanted to buy any tamales. This story makes me furious. I am furious because I know that no one is going to come to my door and ask me if I want to buy tamales, because the answer to that question is always yes. Tamales are like a top 3 favorite food of mine, and ever since I moved back to Minnesota, away from Nevada, really good tamales have become so much harder to find. Please, someone sell me tamales. Story 22. One year I got a roommate through Craigslist. The guy was weird for sure, but good-natured and paid rent. Anyway, after about 2 months of living with him, my cousin comes over to hang. I introduced the two, and my cousin, in the most chill voice ever, said, "Nah, man, we know each other." Turns out they were college roommates 5 years earlier in another state. Story 23. When I was a kid, around 13, I played a lot of a video game called Diablo 2. I started a clan with a few people I'd met on the internet, and we played every day. At some point, we were helping some random person, and he asked to join. We thought he was nice enough, so we let him in. As part of this clan, we had a shared account we used to store game items for each other after. About a month of playing, this new guy goes in and changed the password, steals the account, and defriends everyone. Completely disappears off the map with all of our stuff. Fast forward a year later, and my family moves to Texas, and it's my first day at school. I'm sitting in algebra class talking to the person in the seat next to me, and he mentions he plays Diablo. I said me too, and that I ran a clan and everything. I asked his username, and it was him. 2,000 miles away from where I first virtually met this guy, he's sitting next to me in math class. When I told him, his face went into total shock, and we didn't know how to respond. It was awkward for sure. Ended up telling him I didn't care and was over it, but let's just say we didn't end up becoming friends. Story 24. I have 2. First was in Mexico when I was 16. At the resort, there's a spot to paint pottery, and I was there and my dad, who was sitting across from me. Next to us was another father and his daughter. They were both from our hometown. I asked the daughter what high school she went to, and it turned out to be the high school my recent ex went to. It turns out she did. She is his girlfriend. It was crazy, and we both thought it was so cool. Meanwhile, our dads are finding it so strange, and we're confused why an ex and a current girlfriend were excited to meet each other. The second coincidence was at my work. One of my coworkers was the same age, and it turns out his birthday was 2 days before mine. I asked him where he was born. He was born at a military hospital in Oklahoma, the hospital I was born at. We were both born in the same hospital, the same nursery, just feet away from each other. It was one of the coolest moments in my life. Wow, you were born at nearly the same time in the same hospital as me. That is so crazy. It's also crazy how much you look like my parents with the dark hair like theirs instead of blonde like mine. Not to mention your eyes and facial structure and... uh-oh. Story 25. Not me, but a pretty interesting story in my family. Two of my great-grandparents got imprisoned in the same jail and served time together. My great-grandfather on my mother's side was an architect and even drew my other great-grandfather's house. Story 26. I moved from my small hometown halfway across the country to a small city where I knew absolutely no one. At the first party I went to in the new town, I started chatting with a guy. Turns out he had also just left my small hometown. Story 27. I have an uncommon last name and a not-too-common first name. I was in the hospital for a surgery and the person in the next room was there for the same surgery. Come to find out that we were second cousins and never knew that the other existed. He had the same name as me and his wife had the same name as my wife. Story 28. I had recently graduated from a large state school and found a room in an empty house to rent. Since I was moving from my college apartment, I didn't have furniture and decided to grab a dresser a previous occupant had left in the basement. It wasn't anything crazy looking, but it wasn't a basic mass-produced IKEA dresser either. Something a bit older but not antique. Three of my friends helped me move it upstairs while we were waiting for a fourth. The fourth friend arrives, walks into my room, and stares at my dresser for a long time before saying, "Why do you have my dresser?" It turns out her parents had donated her childhood dresser to Goodwill, and the previous occupant of the house was from the same tiny town she was and had got his dresser at that Goodwill. You see a coincidence of a dresser being given up by a family, bought by someone, moved to a different town, and coming back into contact with its owner. What I see is a potential sequel to the brave little toaster called the Brave Big Dresser, and we're gonna make millions, I tells ya, millions! Story 29. I was at the dentist getting a crown extension. Dentist. Hey, you were born on July 13th. So was I. Assistant. Me too. We all shared a look of surprise and longing with each other. Longing to be closer. Then they drill the absolute F out of my teeth. Story 30. Had a kidney transplant last year. Nurse makes a comment about it having my name on it. He elaborated to say that the donor had the same surname as me. Story 31. An officer from a different PD was showing me a picture of a guy they wanted to arrest in a different part of town. As I looked up from the computer, I see Dip Crap riding by on a bike, literally 5 feet away from the squad car. Story 32. 2 years ago, I was in Tokyo on holiday. I looked on Instagram and saw an old friend post a story showing that he was also in Tokyo. We hadn't spoken in a few years, but I sent him a message letting him know we were in the same city. Not even 5 minutes later, we walked into a bar and he was standing there. This past November, I was in Toronto on business. After dinner, we went to a pub downtown. The first person I saw when I walked in was the same friend from Tokyo. We both live in Winnipeg. Now, I definitely know just how far it is between Winnipeg and Toronto because I'm a smart, clever man, definitely, and I'm definitely not stalling for time as I type it into Google Maps. Yeah, wow, yeah, that is definitely a coincidence. Story 33. A classmate of mine sent a fake email that looked totally legit to select members of my class saying that we had failed a really important exam, which carries bad consequences for our career. After we freaked out, he let us know it was just a joke, and when the results came out a week later, there was only one person who failed, my classmate that sent the fake email. Probably should have spent more time studying and less time pulling pranks. Story 34. Seeing Paul McCartney, the Beatles, on TV in 2001 and noticing he was tall. Next day I'm walking down a very quiet street and walking toward me is a really tall guy and it was Paul McCartney. He must have seen my expression, so he veered my way, stuck his hand out and said, "Hi, mate." I was shocked. 18 years later, I'm still shocked, LOL. Edit, I'm 6'1", turns out he's 5'11". Maybe he was just lanky. He certainly appeared tall to me. I should also add that he didn't just stick his hand out, I meant to say he shook my hand. Crazy. Then he briskly walked away. A very brief encounter, but a really important one for me. I also wouldn't blame anyone for not believing me. It's a weird story. Story 35. The pastor of the church where I was a musician informed me that a wedding couple would be coming to see me after Sunday services to discuss music for their forthcoming ceremony. It turned out to be a girl I dated in high school that I hadn't seen or heard from since graduation and her fiancé. She remembered my organ playing from back then and already knew what piece she wanted. I didn't even have to demonstrate. Okay, you've got to play this one carefully. You are at high risk of this becoming a romantic comedy scenario, and you need to resist that at all costs. Do not give in to cliches or hackneyed schemes. I know your best friend, who is probably like a bit out there and believes in fate and stuff, is going to tell you that this was predestined. I'm going to need you to ignore him. Under no circumstances are you to give a toast at the wedding. Do this, and we should avoid another tired, trite, wedding-centric rom-com. Story 36. I've had several small world experiences, but the biggest was talking to a girl after my first university class and discovering through the course of a 2-hour-long conversation that our grandmothers had been each other's maids of honor, and my aunt and her mom were best friends since childhood. Story 37. Both of my grandfathers were named William, and both grandmothers were named Joyce. Story 38. Started dating this girl a few weeks ago. We got to talking about where we live, etc. She lives in not only the same building, but the exact same apartment I lived in 2 years ago. It was so effing bizarre. Walked into my old apartment that I never thought I would see again. What are the odds? Story 39. The person who sits next to me at work copies everything I do, except she has no way of knowing I wear a blue sweater, she wears a blue sweater. I bring leftover spaghetti, she brings leftover spaghetti. It is so weird, I almost hate her. She has no way of knowing. She sees him type into the thread as she watches him through the window of his living room, imitating his every movement on the keyboard. He reaches away from the keyboard and grabs a chip, as she grabs a leaf from the tree she sits in, mimicking his exact chew. One day she will wear his skin, and then she will truly be him. Story 40. I used to get 2 buses home from work. I got off the first one having left my phone and keys on the front seat of the bus without realizing. Got on the second bus, went to my favorite front seat, and my possessions that I didn't know were missing were waiting for me. The bus had changed driver and route. Still freaks my nuts out to this day. I'm sorry, what? Story 41. Last summer, I went to New York with my family for a week. A friend of mine that I hadn't seen since she graduated from college was living and working in New York at the time, so we decided to meet up for drinks. As we were walking through Times Square at 11 p.m. on a Saturday, who did we see on the other side of the street but another friend of ours from college? I knew he had been living in New Jersey, but he was in New York for a Grindr date. The 3 of us went to a bar and talked about life and how none of our friends lived in Ireland anymore. They've all moved abroad. It was bittersweet and a crazy coincidence that 3 friends from a small university in Dublin would serendipitously meet in New York City. Story 42. When I was a kid while hiking with my dad, I was babbling and said, "The teacher told us if you speak too much, a fly will get in your mouth." In the exact moment, a fly flew into my mouth. Story 43. When my best friend and I were around 16 years old, we both had a bunch of coins we were taking to Coinstar at Kroger. We had the exact same total in coins, to the penny. Story 44. Friend's grandpa was a friend of my grandpa during the Vietnam War. They recognized each other at my high school graduation. They went to the same school, now their grandchildren are in the same school. Story 45. Me and my partner were looking for a car. We went to a Subaru Impreza and found one for our price range and on our street that had my 3-letter initials for its license plate. The seller was a high school friend of my partner. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.